Alarms blaring, gates slamming, the sound of running feet echoing off cold concrete. In 1971, the Atlanta Federal Detention Center was breached from the inside, not with dynamite, but with a lie. A notorious imposter walked out the front door, leaving guards to realize they had escorted him out. Frank Abagnale, Jr., had done the impossible, escaping one of America's tightest detention centers by pretending to be the inspector sent to test it. Federal agents were baffled, and the media was captivated by the sheer audacity of the escape. The prison warden was left speechless, facing the embarrassment of an empty cell and a fake inspector card. How could a man locked behind bars convince the very guards watching him that he was their superior officer? Hi, welcome to another episode of The Score. I am Alina Stone. To understand this audacious escape, we must look at Frank's journey leading up to his capture. Frank Abagnale, Jr. was already a household name in the FBI's fraud division. For years, he had forged checks, posed as a Pan Am pilot, a pediatrician, and a legal prosecutor. His charm was his primary weapon, allowing him to bypass security protocols across the globe. But in 1971, the law finally caught up with Frank, detaining him in Cobb County before moving him to Atlanta. The Atlanta Federal Detention Center was a formidable concrete fortress designed to hold high-risk inmates. Guards patrolled the high walls, and heavy steel gates secured every corridor. But when Frank arrived, a bizarre administrative oversight occurred. The U.S. Marshal forgot the commitment papers. Normally, an inmate could not be held without this paperwork, but the intake officer processed Frank anyway. Frank immediately recognized this clerical error as his golden ticket. He noticed the guards were unusually anxious and tense during their shifts. The source of their anxiety was the prison board's threat of surprise undercover inspections. Rumors circulated that inspectors were posing as inmates to evaluate guard behavior and identify security lapses. Frank decided to feed this paranoia, drop subtle hints, and play the role of the undercover inspector. He began standing tall, observing guard rotations, and maintaining an air of quiet authority. He took notes in a small pad, watching the prison staff with an analytical glare. When guards approached, Frank spoke with the tone of an auditor, critiquing their execution of protocols. The guards, terrified of a negative report that could ruin their careers, began treating him with nervous respect. Instead of commanding him, they started asking him if everything was satisfactory. Frank played the part perfectly, complaining about the food quality and cell cleanliness. He drop-fed information, suggesting he was sent directly by the Federal Bureau of Prisons. The jail cells were damp and cold, but Frank's confidence radiated warmth and power. He made the guards believe that his incarceration was merely a cover story for his audit. With the staff thoroughly convinced, Frank needed to escalate the plan. He had to secure official documentation. To pull off a con of this magnitude, he needed a partner on the outside. Frank's lifeline to the free world was a devoted friend named Gene Sebring. Gene was smart, resourcefully creative, and willing to risk imprisonment to help him. Using visiting hours, Frank communicated his detailed requirements to Gene in code. He instructed her to fabricate official business cards and credentials from the Bureau of Prisons. Gene visited local print shops, carefully choosing cardstock and matching the federal seals. She spent hours at a typewriter, crafting realistic inspector credentials with Frank's alias. During visiting sessions, Gene smuggled these forged documents inside a stack of legal papers. The guard at the visitor desk, trusting the undercover inspector, barely checked the contents. Frank now held the physical proof of his authority, hidden beneath his mattress. But cards alone weren't enough. He needed voice confirmation to bypass the warden. Legend has it that Gene also set up a phone line, posing as Frank's secretary at the Bureau headquarters. When the prison warden called to verify the inspector's details, Gene answered the phone with professional poise. She confirmed that Inspector Abagnale was indeed conducting a classified security audit in Atlanta. This phone confirmation bypassed the final layer of administrative skepticism. The warden was now fully convinced he had a high-ranking bureau official in cell block C. Frank and Jean's coordination was flawless, a masterclass in social engineering. They had built a virtual bureau department using nothing but a rotary phone and cardstock. Every visit from Jean was a tactical briefing, planning the exact route of escape. They mapped the parking lot, the shift schedules, and the gates. Jean purchased a blue getaway car, registering it under a false name. She kept the engine tuned and ready, parking it in the public lot during visiting hours. Frank practiced his demeanor, ensuring not a single stutter would betray his con. He knew that the slightest sign of hesitation would lock the steel doors forever. The stage was set, the credentials printed, and the getaway car parked. It was time for Frank to initiate the final phase of his audit, the breach. Frank's audit became more intense, requesting private interviews with guard officers. He sat in administrative offices, reviewing logbooks and pointing out security blind spots. He reprimanded guards for leaving cell keys unattended or failing to secure gates. Rather than defying him, the guards apologized and promised immediate corrections. Frank's notebook became a symbol of dread among the prison staff. He walked through security checkpoints with his forged inspector card, barely drawing a glance. Some suspect that Frank even paid off a guard to ignore the missing martial commitment papers. An alternative theory suggests a guard officer was actively helping Frank, believing it would secure a promotion at the bureau. The psychological leverage Frank held was absolute. Paranoia dictated every guard's actions. He was allowed to inspect the outer perimeter, walking the fence line without handcuffs. Frank carefully noted the response times of the guard towers and gate controls. He spent hours in the common areas, gathering information on shift changes and gate keys. He noticed that at 3:00 p.m., the gate guards rotated, leaving a brief window of confusion. Frank timed his escape to coincide with this guard rotation. He complained to the warden that the main gate guard was slow to respond, asserting his authority. This move ensured that the guards would open the gates quickly when Frank approached. Frank's cell was no longer a cage, it was his administrative office. He had access to prison stationery, which he used to write mock inspection reports. The guards were so intimidated that they stopped conducting standard searches of his cell. They didn't want to anger the man who held their careers in his notebook. Frank's forged credentials remained safe under his mattress, ready for the big day. The rain began to fall heavily on the afternoon of the planned escape. The gray weather provided the perfect visual cover, reducing visibility across the yard. Frank put on his best suit, adjusting his tie with the precision of a federal official. He walked down the corridor, his footsteps sounding firm and purposeful. He nodded to the cell block guard, who quickly unlocked the tier gate. Frank walked into the administrative wing, carrying his notebook and forged credentials. He entered the warden's reception area, requesting to speak to the duty officer. He explained that he had completed his security evaluation and needed to exit. He claimed his colleague was waiting in a car outside to collect his notes. The duty officer, anxious to see the auditor depart, didn't hesitate. He signed the release slip, authorizing Frank's departure through the outer gates. Frank walked towards the main sally port, the final secure gate separating him from freedom. The sally port guard looked at the release slip, then looked up at Frank's confident expression. The heavy iron lock turned, and the gate slowly swung open. Frank stepped out of the sally port, feeling the cool Georgia rain on his face. He walked down the concrete pathway, maintaining a slow, dignified pace. Any sign of running would alert the guard towers and trigger an immediate lockdown. He reached the outer gate, showing his credentials to the final guard on duty. The guard smiled, nodded, and pushed the button to unlock the final gate. Frank walked through, leaving the federal detention grounds behind him. He headed toward the public parking lot, searching for Jean's getaway car. The blue sedan was idling in the corner of the lot, its wipers sweeping across the windshield. Jean saw Frank approaching, her heart pounding as she unlocked the passenger door. Frank slid into the seat, shutting the door quietly to avoid drawing attention. He told Jean to drive slowly, blending in with the incoming visitor traffic. The sedan pulled out of the parking lot, passing the main guard tower. The guard in the tower watched the car pass, unaware that his most famous inmate was inside. Jean turned onto the main highway, accelerating as they left the prison in the distance. Frank took off his wet suit jacket, finally breathing a sigh of relief. He had conned his way out of a federal prison camp, using nothing but confidence and cardstock. Back at the prison, the 3:00 p.m. shift change was occurring, creating the usual brief chaos. A guard officer went to cell block C to check on the inspector inmate. He found the cell empty, with nothing but a blank notepad on the bunk. Confused, he asked the gate guard, who confirmed that the inspector had departed. It took the warden another hour to realize they had let a prisoner walk out. By the time the alarms finally blared, Frank and Jean were miles away. The escape caused embarrassment for the Federal Bureau of Prisons. The FBI launched a massive manhunt, searching every transit hub in Atlanta. Frank Abagnale was once again the nation's most wanted imposter. He and Jean traveled north, avoiding police checkpoints and using assumed identities. Frank hid in plain sight, continuing to cash forged checks to fund their flight. He was eventually captured 2 months later by FBI agents in Washington, D.C. While the escape details remained debated, Frank's con became a legendary study in prison security flaws. It exposed the dangerous weakness of relying on visual authority and blind trust. Jean Sebring faced charges for her role, but the loyalty she showed became part of the escape's legend. Frank would serve his time, eventually turning his skills to help the FBI catch other check forgers. His story was immortalized in print and on the big screen, captivate audiences worldwide. But the memory of the wet afternoon in Atlanta remains the peak of his imposter career. A reminding lesson that security is only as strong as its weakest human link. If you want to hear more stories of the world's greatest scores, make sure to like and subscribe to The Score. Join us next time as we unlock another vault of historical true crime heists.